There's a fundamental misunderstanding that keeps most of us trapped in endless seeking. We believe we must get somewhere, achieve something, become someone other than who we already are. If that just hit you in the chest, if you felt that truth land somewhere deep, then you're exactly where you need to be. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're listening from your bed at 2 in the morning, during your lunch break, or while walking through your neighborhood, take a moment to let me know in the comments where in this beautiful world you're joining us from. Here's what I want you to do right now. Grab something cozy, a soft blanket, maybe dim the lights. Find a position where you can truly settle in, because what we're about to explore together over the next 3 hours isn't just information, it's transformation. We're going to discover why this endless chase for somewhere else is the very thing that keeps us from recognizing the completeness that's already here. And by the time we're finished, you'll understand why the ancient masters said that letting go isn't about losing anything. It's about finally receiving everything. This isn't just another video you'll forget tomorrow. This is an invitation to remember something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten, something that will change how you move through every single day. So settle in, breathe with me, and let's begin this journey home to yourself. There's something that follows most of us through life like a gentle fog we've become so used to walking in, we no longer question it. We adapt to it. We think it's just the natural atmosphere of being human. This is the sense of incompletion, that quiet, persistent feeling that something is missing, that you are somehow not quite enough as you are right now, that life itself, in this present moment, isn't quite adequate yet. We believe we must get somewhere, achieve something, become someone other than who we already are. And so we set off on this great journey of life, like it's a straight road with a finish line at the end, some distant place where all the pieces of the puzzle finally click into place. But this illusion of a destination only creates a perpetual sense of incompletion. It feeds the notion that now is never quite enough, that you are never quite enough. And so we live in this fog, always looking ahead, always believing that fulfillment is just around the next corner. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, recognized this as the very foundation of human suffering, what he called dukkha in his first noble truth. But dukkha isn't just about obvious pain or dramatic hardship. It's about this exact fog we're describing, this underlying restlessness, this sense that something is always slightly off. Think about how this shows up in your own life. You wake up in the morning, and before your feet even touch the floor, your mind is already cataloging what's incomplete, what needs to be done, what hasn't been achieved yet, what's still missing from your experience. You might have a beautiful moment, sitting with your morning coffee, watching sunlight stream through the window, and for just an instant, everything feels perfectly complete. But then, almost immediately, the fog rolls back in. Your mind begins its familiar routine of measuring this moment against some imagined better version of life. We think, once I have this, then I will feel peace. Once I become that, then I will be free. Once I achieve this goal, find this relationship, reach this level of success, then, finally, I'll be able to rest in contentment. And so life becomes a cycle of postponing happiness, peace, and contentment until some future event justifies it. We live in perpetual postponement, always believing that the next achievement will be the one that finally clears the fog. But here's what's fascinating, and perhaps you've noticed this in your own experience. Every time we reach a new milestone, the mind shifts the target. The finish line moves. What was once a goal becomes just another step, and suddenly there's something else that needs to be accomplished before we can truly feel complete. Let me paint a picture that might feel familiar. You finally get that promotion you've been working toward for months. For maybe a day or two, you feel genuinely satisfied. But then, almost imperceptibly, the fog begins to creep back in. Now it's about the next level, the next challenge, the next thing that needs to be conquered to prove your worth. Or perhaps you've experienced this in relationships. You meet someone wonderful, and for a while, that sense of incompletion seems to dissolve. But gradually, you find yourself focusing on what's not perfect about the relationship, what needs to be improved, what conversations need to happen before you can truly feel secure. The fog doesn't disappear, it just finds new territory to occupy. There's an ancient Zen story that illustrates this beautifully. A wealthy merchant spent his entire life accumulating treasures, believing that when he had enough, he would finally feel secure and complete. One day, he met a poor monk sitting peacefully by the river, smiling with such contentment that the merchant was puzzled. "How can you be so happy with nothing?" the merchant asked. The monk replied, "How can you be so miserable with everything?" The merchant realized then that his sense of incompletion had nothing to do with what he possessed. It was the way he was relating to life itself. This story points to something profound that the ancient masters understood. The fog of incompletion isn't created by what we lack externally. It's created by the very belief that something should be different than it is. But let's go deeper into how this fog actually operates in our daily lives. It's incredibly sophisticated in its manifestations. Sometimes it appears as ambition, that driving need to achieve more, be more, have more. Sometimes it shows up as comparison, looking at others and feeling like you're falling behind in some imaginary race. Other times, the fog manifests as spiritual, seeking itself. We can become so focused on becoming more enlightened, more peaceful, more evolved, that we miss the peace that's already here. We turn even our spiritual practice into another project, another way of trying to become someone other than who we are right now. The Buddha understood this trap so clearly. He spent 6 years practicing extreme asceticism, trying to achieve enlightenment through effort and discipline. He nearly died from starvation, convinced that if he could just push harder, deny himself more completely, he would finally break through to some special state. But his awakening came only when he stopped trying so hard. When he sat under the Bodhi tree and simply allowed himself to be present with what was already here. He realized that what he had been seeking through years of struggle was never actually absent. It had been obscured by the very effort to find it. This is the beautiful paradox at the heart of all genuine spiritual understanding. What we seek, we already are. What we think we lack has never actually been missing. The fog of incompletion is like a dream of thirst while sitting by a clear stream. We've become so accustomed to this fog that we think it's just part of being human. We wake up in it. We make decisions from within it. We plan our entire lives around trying to escape it. But we rarely stop to question whether this feeling of not quite enough is actually true. The Buddha taught that this sense of incompletion is like a mirage in the desert. From a distance, it looks absolutely real. You can see the water. You can imagine how refreshing it will be when you reach it. But the closer you get, the further it recedes. And if you could somehow reach the spot where the mirage appeared to be, you'd find nothing but sand. Our seeking often works the same way. We chase after experiences, relationships, achievements, spiritual states, all the while believing that they will finally give us the sense of completeness we're looking for. But when we reach them, we often find that the feeling of incompletion has simply found new reasons to persist. Consider how this plays out in the realm of material success. There's always another level of income that would make you feel truly secure, another possession that would finally bring satisfaction, another experience that would prove you're living life fully. The fog is endlessly creative in finding new objects for our seeking. But it's not just about material things. The fog can attach itself to emotional states too. If I could just feel more confident, then I'd be happy. If I could just get over this anxiety, then I'd be free. If I could just find inner peace, then my life would be complete. Do you see the pattern? It's always if this, then that. Always conditional. Always dependent on some future state or achievement. The fog convinces us that our well-being is hostage to circumstances aligning in just the right way. This doesn't mean that growth, love, or accomplishment are meaningless. It means that when we chase them from a place of lack, from within the fog of incompletion, we're always one step behind the peace we're seeking. Let me ask you something that might sound strange at first. What if nothing is actually missing? What if this fundamental assumption that something needs to be added to your life, to your experience, to who you are, What if that assumption itself is the source of the fog? The Zen tradition has a beautiful teaching about this. They say that enlightenment isn't about gaining something new. It's about recognizing what was always already here. It's like spending your whole life looking for your glasses while they're sitting on your head. The moment you realize where they are, you see that you were never actually lacking anything. There's another Zen story that illustrates this perfectly. A student spent years traveling from teacher to teacher, seeking the ultimate spiritual experience. Finally, exhausted and discouraged, he sat down by a simple country road. An old woman approached and asked why he looked so sad. When he explained his long search for enlightenment, she smiled gently and said, "You poor man, you've been carrying your treasure with you all along, but you've been so busy looking for it elsewhere that you never noticed." But this realization can't be forced or manufactured. It arises naturally when we begin to see the fog for what it really is, not the weather, but a way of perceiving. Think about those moments in your life when the fog has lifted naturally, even if just for a few minutes. Maybe you were completely absorbed in a conversation with someone you love. Maybe you were walking in nature and suddenly felt perfectly at peace. Maybe you were creating something, cooking a meal, or simply sitting quietly, and for that moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. In those moments, were you actually lacking anything? Or were you simply present enough to notice the completeness that's always here? The fog teaches us to treat these moments as exceptions, pleasant breaks from the serious business of getting somewhere. But what if they're not exceptions at all? What if they're glimpses of what life actually feels like when we're not lost in the story of incompletion? What if those moments of natural contentment aren't special states to be achieved, but our actual nature to be recognized? What if the fog is the exception and clarity is the rule? The Buddha's insight was that our suffering doesn't come from what's happening to us. It comes from how we relate to what's happening. When we believe that this moment should be different, that we should feel different, that our lives should look different, that's when the fog thickens. But when we can be present with what is, without the constant commentary about what's missing or what needs to be fixed, something beautiful happens. The fog begins to thin all by itself. Not because we forced it away, but because we stopped feeding it with our resistance. There's another Zen story about a student who came to his master complaining about his meditation. "Master, my mind is so busy and distracted. When will I finally achieve the peace I'm seeking?" The master picked up a glass of muddy water and asked the student to make it clear. The student shook the glass vigorously, but this only made the water muddier. "Just let it sit," the master said quietly. As they watched together in silence, the mud gradually settled on its own, and the water became perfectly clear. This is how the fog of incompletion works. The more we struggle against it, the thicker it becomes. But when we simply notice it without trying to fix it or escape it, it begins to settle naturally. And in that settling, we discover something that was always here, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a completeness that exists regardless of what we have or haven't achieved. The ancient Buddhist texts speak of something called our original nature, the awareness that exists before all the stories about what's wrong or missing. This isn't some mystical concept, but something as immediate and present as your breath. It's the consciousness that's aware of the fog, the space in which all experiences arise and pass away. When we rest in this awareness, even for a moment, we realize something profound. The awareness itself has never been incomplete. It's been witnessing all our seeking, all our striving, all our sense of lack, but it has remained untouched by any of it. Like space itself, which contains all things, but is never limited by what it contains. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on growth and dreams. It's about recognizing that your worth, your peace, your fundamental okayness doesn't depend on external validation. When you know this, really know it, you can still pursue goals and dreams, but from a completely different place. Not from desperation or lack, but from joy and natural expression. The ancient masters understood that when we act from a sense of already being whole, the world responds differently to us. We're no longer grasping or demanding or trying to prove ourselves. We're simply expressing what's already complete within us. And this energy of fullness rather than lack, creates entirely different results in our lives. As we sit here together in this moment, I want you to try something. Just for the next few breaths, let go of the story about what's missing from your life. Let go of the narrative about what you need to become or achieve to finally be okay. Just be here, breathing, aware, present. Can you feel it? That subtle shift when you're not trying to get somewhere else? When you're not measuring this moment against some imagined better version. This is what it feels like when the fog begins to lift. This is the clear air that's always been here, patiently waiting beneath the clouds of seeking. The truth is, you've never actually been incomplete. You've only been walking in a fog that made it seem that way. And fog, no matter how thick it appears, can never actually touch the sun. It can only temporarily obscure our view of what was always already shining. In our next part of this journey together, we're going to explore what happens when we really see this, when we understand that the finish line we've been chasing has been moving precisely because we've been chasing it. We'll discover what life feels like when we stop running toward tomorrow and start living from the wholeness that's available right here, right now. There's something almost magical about the way our minds work when it comes to goals and achievements. We set our sights on something, a promotion, a relationship, a financial milestone, a personal breakthrough, and we pour our energy into reaching it. We tell ourselves, once I have this, then I will feel peace. Once I achieve that, then I will be truly happy. Once I reach this level, then I can finally rest in contentment. And here's the beautiful, mysterious, and sometimes frustrating truth about being human. Every time we reach a new milestone, the mind shifts the target. The finish line moves. What was once a goal becomes just another step, and suddenly there's something else that needs to be accomplished before we can truly feel complete. It's as if we're running a race where the finish line has legs of its own, always staying just ahead of us, no matter how fast we run. And so life becomes a cycle of postponing happiness, peace, and contentment until some future event justifies it. The Buddha, in his profound understanding of human nature, called this the second noble truth, that the root of suffering is attachment, or tanha in Sanskrit. But tanha isn't just about being attached to things. It's about being attached to the idea that our well-being depends on external conditions. It's about believing that we can't be truly okay until something outside ourselves changes or improves. Let me share with you how this plays out in the most ordinary and relatable ways. Maybe you remember when you were younger, thinking that if you could just get your driver's license, you'd feel free and independent. And for a brief moment when you first held those keys, maybe you did feel exactly that way. But then, almost without noticing, the focus shifted to having your own car, and then a better car, and then perhaps a house to park it in. Or think about your career journey. There was probably a time when reaching a certain position seemed like it would solve everything. You imagined how confident you'd feel, how secure, how respected. And when you finally got there might have been a brief moment of satisfaction, but then the mind began its familiar dance. Now it was about the next level, the next challenge, the next achievement that would prove your worth once and for all. This isn't a flaw in your character or a sign that you're doing something wrong. This is simply how the mind operates when it believes that contentment is conditional. It's like a sophisticated search engine that's constantly scanning for what's missing, what needs to be improved, what gap needs to be filled next. There's an ancient Zen story about a successful businessman who worked tirelessly for years to build his company. He told himself that once he reached a certain level of success, he would finally be able to relax and enjoy life. When he achieved that goal, he felt satisfied for exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, he found himself lying awake at night, worrying about his competitors and planning his next expansion. Confused and frustrated, he visited a Zen master. "Master, I achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I'm still not at peace. What's wrong with me?" The master smiled and pointed to a cat chasing its own tail in the garden. "Tell me," the master said, "when do you think that cat will catch what it's chasing?" The businessman watched for a moment and then understood. As long as he was chasing happiness, it would always stay just ahead of him. But let's dive deeper into how this cycle of conditional contentment actually operates in our daily lives. It's remarkably subtle and sophisticated in its manifestations. In relationships, we might think, once I find the right person, then I'll feel complete. And when we do find someone wonderful, there's often a honeymoon period where this seems to be true. But gradually, the mind begins to find imperfections, things that need to be worked on, conversations that need to happen, changes that need to be made before the relationship can be truly satisfying. With our health and fitness, we set a goal weight or a fitness milestone, believing that reaching it will finally make us feel confident and attractive. But even when we achieve it, there's usually something else that needs attention. A different body part to tone, a new health metric to optimize, a different standard of vitality to reach. In our spiritual lives, we might seek a particular experience or state of consciousness, thinking that once we achieve it, we'll finally feel peaceful and enlightened. But even profound spiritual experiences can become just another step on an endless ladder of seeking. I had that awakening, but now I need to sustain it. I found some peace, but I need deeper peace. I felt connected, but I need to feel more connected. Do you see the pattern? It's not that the achievements themselves are meaningless, or that wanting things is wrong. It's that when we make our peace conditional on getting them, we enter into a contract with life that can never be fulfilled. The Buddha understood this so clearly. He saw that tanha, this craving for things to be different, is like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Each achievement temporarily satisfies the craving, but also strengthens the belief that satisfaction comes from external sources. Let me paint a picture of how this might look in a single day of your life. You wake up and immediately check your phone, unconsciously seeking some piece of information or connection that will make the day feel more complete. At breakfast, you might find yourself already planning what needs to be accomplished to make the day worthwhile. At work, you focus on tasks that will bring you closer to your next goal, your next milestone, your next proof of progress. Even in moments of genuine pleasure or connection, there can be this subtle undercurrent of, "This is nice, but what's next? This feels good, but how can I make it last? This is beautiful, but what do I need to do to have more experiences like this?" The mind has become so skilled at this pattern that it can even turn presence into a goal. I need to be more mindful. I should meditate more consistently. I want to be more grateful. even our desire for peace becomes another item on the endless to-do list of becoming. There's another beautiful teaching story from the Zen tradition about this. A monk spent years practicing meditation, always seeking deeper states of concentration and insight. One day, his master found him sitting in perfect stillness and asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm practicing to become a Buddha," the monk replied proudly. The master picked up a tile and began rubbing it with a cloth. "What are you doing, master?" the confused monk asked. "I'm polishing this tile to make it into a mirror," the master replied. "But master, no amount of polishing can turn a tile into a mirror." The master smiled. "And no amount of sitting can turn you into what you already are." This story points to something profound about the nature of conditional happiness. When we believe that we need to achieve, accomplish, or become something in order to be okay, we're like the monk trying to polish a tile into a mirror. We're trying to create through effort what is already present by nature. But let's be honest about how challenging this realization can be. Our entire culture, our education system, our economic structure, our social media feeds, everything around us reinforces the idea that happiness and fulfillment come from achievement and acquisition. We're surrounded by messages that say, "You're not enough as you are, but if you buy this, achieve that, become this, then you will be." And it's not just external messages. This pattern often starts very early in our lives. Well-meaning parents and teachers taught us to find our worth in our accomplishments. "I'm proud of you when you get good grades. You're such a good child when you behave. You'll be successful if you work hard." Love and approval became conditional on performance, and we internalized this as the way life works. So when we find ourselves caught in this cycle of moving finish lines, it's important to have compassion for how natural and understandable this pattern is. We're not failing at life. We're not broken or flawed. We're simply operating from a learned belief about where happiness comes from. The Buddhist teaching of Tanha helps us understand that this craving isn't a personal failing, it's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of satisfaction. We keep looking for a permanent solution in temporary experiences. We keep trying to build a foundation of contentment on the shifting sands of external circumstances. But here's where the teaching becomes truly liberating. The Buddha didn't say that craving was bad or that we should never want anything. He said that understanding the nature of craving is the key to freedom. When we really see how this pattern operates, when we witness it with clarity, rather than being unconsciously driven by it, something begins to shift. Imagine for a moment what it would feel like to pursue your goals and dreams without the desperate edge of, "I need this to be okay." What would it be like to work towards something you desire, while simultaneously knowing that your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on achieving it? This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on growth and accomplishment. It's about recognizing the difference between natural expansion and desperate seeking. When a flower grows toward the sun, it's not because the flower thinks it's inadequate as it is. It grows because growth is its nature, because expansion and expression are inherent to life itself. There's a profound difference between creating from joy and creating from lack. When we act from the knowing that we're already complete, our actions become an expression of that completeness rather than an attempt to achieve it. The energy is entirely different. The results are entirely different. And most importantly, our experience of the process is entirely different. The trap of conditional contentment is that it turns life into a perpetual delay. We're always living for some future moment when conditions will finally be right for us to be happy. But life is happening now. Joy is available now. Peace is accessible now. Not because circumstances are perfect, but because the capacity for these experiences exists independent of circumstances. Let me ask you to consider something. Think of a moment in your life when you felt genuinely content, truly at peace, completely satisfied with what was happening. It might have been a quiet moment in nature, a deep conversation with a friend, a creative experience where you lost track of time, or simply a peaceful morning when everything felt exactly right. In that moment, were you lacking anything? Or were you simply present enough to notice the fullness that was already there? Were you happy because you had achieved something? Or were you happy because you had temporarily stopped needing to achieve anything? These moments are clues. They're glimpses of what life feels like when we're not caught in the cycle of conditional happiness. They show us that contentment isn't something we create through effort. It's something we uncover by removing the obstacles we've placed in front of it. The Buddha's insight about attachment doesn't mean we should avoid having preferences or stop setting goals. It means we can hold our preferences lightly, pursue our goals joyfully, and engage with life fully, while knowing that our deepest fulfillment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. This is perhaps one of the most practical teachings in all of Buddhism. When we understand that the finish line keeps moving precisely because we're chasing it, we can begin to run a different kind of race. We can engage with life's adventures and challenges from a place of playfulness rather than desperation, curiosity rather than craving, expression rather than seeking. And here's what's beautiful about this shift. When we stop making our peace conditional on external achievements, we often find that our capacity for achievement actually increases. When we're not grasping desperately for results, when we're not driven by the fear of not being enough, we can act with more clarity, more creativity, more authentic power. As we continue this journey together, we're going to explore what happens when we stop chasing the moving finish line and instead discover the completeness that's been here all along. We're going to learn what it means to live from fullness rather than lack, from presence rather than seeking, from the joy of what is, rather than the hope of what might be. But for now, just notice. Notice when your mind creates that next finish line, that next condition for happiness. Notice it with gentleness, with curiosity, without judgment. And in that noticing, feel the freedom that comes from seeing the pattern clearly. Because the moment you see it, you're no longer unconsciously trapped by it. The finish line will always keep moving, as long as we believe our peace depends on reaching it. But when we discover that peace was never ahead of us, but always within us, the whole game changes. We're no longer running towards some distant goal. We're simply walking, peacefully and joyfully, in the direction our hearts want to go. There's a story I want to share with you. A story that might sound simple at first, but contains within it one of the most profound truths about human existence. It's the story of a wave in the ocean that spent its entire existence trying desperately to become water. Picture this wave, if you will. It moves with tremendous urgency across the vast ocean, convinced that somewhere ahead, in some perfect moment, through some perfect effort, it will finally achieve its deepest longing. It rises with great ambition, crashes with dramatic intensity, breaks with passionate determination, trying so hard, so very hard, to become what it believes it lacks. The wave looks around and sees other waves that seem more graceful, more powerful, more beautiful. If only I could be like that wave, it thinks. If only I could rise higher, crash more magnificently, create more impressive displays of foam and spray. And so it pushes itself, strives harder, becomes more urgent in its movements, more desperate in its efforts. But here's what the wave doesn't realize, what it has never realized, in all its urgent seeking. It has always been water from the very beginning. Every molecule of its being, every drop of its essence, every particle of its existence has always been exactly what it was trying so desperately to become. This is the beautiful, tragic, and ultimately liberating story of most human lives. We are waves who have forgotten we are water. We spend our days moving with urgency, rising with ambition, crashing with frustration, breaking with disappointment, all in pursuit of something we have never actually been without. In the Zen tradition, there's a teaching that speaks directly to this profound misunderstanding. It's the doctrine of Buddha nature, the understanding that you are already enlightened, you just don't know it yet. Not enlightened as some future achievement, not enlightened as something you need to earn or deserve, but enlightened as your very nature, as what you most fundamentally are. But let's explore what this really means in the texture of your daily life. Because this isn't just a beautiful metaphor or an abstract spiritual concept. This is about recognizing something so immediate, so present, so intimately yours that you've been overlooking it, your entire life. Think about how you wake up in the morning. Before your feet touch the floor, before you check your phone, before you begin the familiar inventory of what needs to be done and what hasn't been accomplished yet, there's a moment of pure awareness. A consciousness that simply knows it exists, that simply recognizes it's awake, that simply is present to the fact of being alive. In that moment, before the wave begins its urgent movement across the ocean of the day, you are like still water, complete, whole, lacking nothing. But then, almost immediately, the familiar patterns begin. The wave starts moving, seeking, striving, trying to become something other than what it naturally is. There's an ancient Zen story about a master who was approached by a student seeking enlightenment. "Master, I have been practicing for years, but I still haven't achieved awakening. What must I do?" The master looked at him kindly and asked, "Who is it that wants to achieve awakening?" The student was confused. "I do, of course." "And who is this I that seeks?" The master continued. "Who is aware of the seeking? Who knows that enlightenment is desired?" As the student sat with these questions, something began to dawn on him. The very awareness that knew about seeking, that was conscious of the desire for enlightenment, that was present to all his spiritual efforts, this awareness had never been unenlightened. It had been there before he started seeking, during all his seeking, and would be there whether he found what he was looking for or not. Like the wave suddenly recognizing it had always been water, the student realized he had always been what he was seeking. But let's bring this understanding down to earth, into the ordinary moments where we actually live our lives. Consider how often you find yourself thinking, "I need to be more confident." But who is it that recognizes the lack of confidence? Who is aware enough to notice that confidence seems absent? The very awareness that can observe the feeling of uncertainty is itself utterly certain of its own existence. It's like water noticing it feels dry while remaining completely wet. Or perhaps you often think, "I need to find inner peace." But consider this carefully. What is it that's aware of the absence of peace? What is it that notices the agitation, the restlessness, the seeking for something calmer? The awareness that can observe the turbulence is itself perfectly still, like the deep ocean that remains undisturbed even when waves crash on its surface. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about Buddha nature. Not that you need to become enlightened, but that the very capacity for enlightenment, the awareness, the consciousness, the presence that you are, has never been damaged or diminished by any experience you've had. It's like space itself, which contains all things but is never limited or changed by what it contains. The wave analogy becomes even more beautiful when we consider how it plays out in our relationships with others. So often, We look at other people and think they have something we lack. If only I could be as calm as that person. If only I had their confidence, their success, their apparent peace. We become waves comparing ourselves to other waves, never realizing that we're all expressions of the same vast ocean. In Zen Buddhism, there's a profound recognition that separation is an illusion. When a wave truly recognizes its nature as water, it simultaneously recognizes that every other wave is also water. The boundaries we perceive between self and other, between my consciousness and your consciousness, between my experience and your experience, these are like the apparent boundaries between waves, which exist on the surface but not in the depths. But here's where this teaching becomes practically transformative in daily life. When you begin to recognize your own wave nature, when you start to see that what you're seeking you already are, the entire quality of your seeking changes. You're no longer a desperate wave crashing towards some distant shore. You become a wave that knows its water and so can play in the ocean with complete freedom. This doesn't mean you stop having preferences or goals or dreams. It means you pursue them from an entirely different place. A wave that knows its water doesn't stop moving, but it moves with grace rather than desperation, with joy rather than urgency, with curiosity rather than craving. Let me share another story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a woman who spent years searching for the perfect teacher, the perfect method, the perfect experience that would finally bring her the spiritual fulfillment she craved. She traveled to distant monasteries, studied ancient texts, practiced complicated techniques, always feeling like she was just one step away from the breakthrough she needed. One evening, exhausted from her searching, she sat by a river and began to cry. "I've tried everything," she said to herself. "I've done everything I know how to do, and I still don't feel enlightened. What's wrong with me?" As she sat there in her despair, she became aware of something simple yet profound. She was aware of her sadness. She was aware of her frustration. She was aware of her seeking. But what was this awareness itself? In that moment, she realized that the seeker and the sought were the same. The wave of her searching and the water of what she sought had never been separate. The consciousness that was aware of feeling unenlightened was itself the enlightenment she had been seeking. Like suddenly recognizing that you've been wearing your glasses while searching for them, she saw that she had always been what she was looking for. This recognition, this shift from becoming to being, is available in any moment. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's an awareness present. An awareness that knows you're listening, that understands meaning, that recognizes the sound of these words and the silence between them. This awareness is not something you have, it's something you are. And it has never, not for one moment, been incomplete or inadequate or in need of improvement. But the mind, that wonderful, creative, sometimes troublesome mind, is like a wave that's forgotten its water nature. It creates elaborate stories about what needs to be fixed, achieved, or transcended. It generates complex narratives about spiritual progress, personal development, and self-improvement. All the while, the awareness in which these stories arise remains perfectly still, perfectly complete, perfectly present. The Buddhist teaching of emptiness, or sunyata, points to this same recognition from a different angle. When we look deeply into any wave, we don't find any solid, separate, independent existence. We find only water, temporarily taking the form of a wave, but never separate from the ocean that is its source and substance. In the same way, when we look deeply into this sense of being a separate self seeking fulfillment, we don't find any solid, independent seeker. We find only consciousness, temporarily taking the form of thoughts and experiences, but never separate from the awareness that is its source and substance. The wave is not other than water, and the self is not other than consciousness. This understanding transforms how we relate to every aspect of our experience. When difficult emotions arise, fear, sadness, anger, confusion, instead of seeing them as problems to be solved or states to be transcended, we can recognize them as waves in the ocean of our being. They arise, they express themselves, they pass away, but they never touch the deep stillness that observes them all. When pleasurable experiences occur, joy, love, peace, excitement, instead of grasping them desperately or fearing their inevitable passing, we can appreciate them as beautiful expressions of our wave nature, while knowing that our fundamental fullness doesn't depend on their presence. Whether the ocean is stormy or calm, it remains the ocean. Whether your experience is challenging or delightful, you remain the awareness in which all experience unfolds. There's a beautiful Zen poem that captures this understanding perfectly. The pine teaches silence, the rock teaches stillness, the lake teaches reflection. But who is the teacher when all teachers are absent? The answer, of course, is the awareness that learns from the pine, the rock, and the lake, the consciousness that is present to all teachings, but depends on none of them for its fundamental completeness. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of awakening as a remembering rather than an achieving. You're not becoming enlightened. You're remembering that you've never been anything else. You're not developing consciousness. You're recognizing the consciousness that has always been here. You're not finding your true nature. You're seeing through the illusion that you ever lost it. But let's be honest about how challenging this recognition can be to integrate into daily life. Even when we have moments of seeing our water nature clearly, the old patterns of wave thinking tend to reassert themselves. We glimpse our completeness and then immediately want to hold on to it, improve it, or share it with others. we turn even the recognition of our Buddha nature into another wave of seeking. This is why the great Zen master Huang Po said, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." He wasn't talking about achieving some special state or maintaining some particular experience. He was pointing to the ordinary awareness that's present right now, reading these words, understanding their meaning, present to this very moment. This awareness is not something extraordinary that needs to be cultivated. It's something so ordinary, so immediate, so intimately present that we overlook it in our search for something more dramatic. The shift from becoming to being is subtle but transformative. Instead of asking, "How can I become more peaceful?" we might ask, "What is the awareness that notices the lack of peace?" Instead of seeking to develop more love, we might explore, what is it that recognizes love when it's present and absence when it's not? Instead of trying to transcend our limitations, we might investigate who or what is aware of these apparent limitations. These questions don't lead to answers in the conventional sense. They lead to a recognition, a remembering, a sudden seeing of what has always been here. Like a wave suddenly realizing it has always been water, we recognize that what we were seeking through all our spiritual practices, all our personal development, all our efforts at self-improvement, has been the very awareness from which all these activities arose. This doesn't make spiritual practice meaningless or personal growth irrelevant. Waves still move across the ocean, and that movement can be graceful or clumsy, harmful or beneficial, beautiful or destructive. But when a wave knows its water nature, its movement comes from play rather than desperation, from expression rather than seeking, from the joy of movement itself rather than the hope of becoming something other than what it is. As we continue this journey together, we're going to explore what it means to live from this recognition, to move through life as consciousness expressing itself, rather than as a limited, self-seeking consciousness. We're going to discover what happens when the wave stops trying to become water and starts enjoying its dance across the ocean of existence. But for now, just rest in this simple recognition. You are the awareness in which all your experiences arise. You are the consciousness that knows when you're happy and when you're sad, when you're confused and when you're clear, when you're seeking and when you're finding. This awareness has never been damaged by any experience, never been diminished by any failure, never been improved by any success. Like water itself, it simply is what it is, taking countless forms while never departing from its essential nature. You are already what you seek. You have always been what you seek. The wave has always been water, and you have always been the consciousness in which all of life unfolds. This is not a belief to adopt or a concept to understand. This is a recognition waiting to dawn, as natural and inevitable as the sun rising over the ocean, illuminating the endless dance of waves that have never for even one moment, been separate from the water that is their source, their substance, and their ultimate destination. Here's something that might shift the way you see everything that's happening in your life right now. Reality is not as fixed as we like to think. It's not a mathematical equation waiting to be solved, not a precise formula where if you just input the right variables, you'll get the perfect outcome. Reality is more like music than mathematics. Fluid, expressive, alive. And like music, life doesn't arrive at a particular point to make sense. Its meaning is in the unfolding, the rhythm, the presence. A symphony doesn't exist for the final note. A jazz improvisation doesn't pour all its beauty into the last chord. The meaning, the aliveness, the very essence of music lives in every moment of its expression. This understanding changes everything about how we relate to our daily experience. Instead of treating life like a problem to be solved, we can begin to experience it like a song to be danced with. Instead of demanding that every moment justify itself by leading somewhere specific, we can allow each moment to be complete in itself, like a note that contains its own perfect fullness. The Buddha understood this fluid nature of existence so deeply that he made it one of the three fundamental characteristics of all experience. He called it anicca, impermanence. All conditioned things are impermanent, he taught. Not as a philosophical concept, but as a lived recognition that everything in this world of form is in constant motion, constant change, constant flow. But here's what's beautiful about this teaching when we really understand it. Impermanence isn't a problem to be solved or a reality to be lamented. It's the very quality that makes life alive, that makes experience possible, that allows for the endless creativity and expression we call existence. Think about a river for a moment. The river is never the same from one moment to the next. The water flowing past you now will never return. Each drop is unique. Each moment of flow is unprecedented. But we don't mourn the water that has passed, or anxiously anticipate the water that's coming. We appreciate the river for what it is, a continuous flow, a living process, a dynamic expression of movement and change. This is how the ancient masters understood life itself. Not as a collection of static things and fixed outcomes, but as a flowing process, a continuous becoming, an endless improvisation in the key of existence. When we align ourselves with this understanding, when we stop trying to make life behave like mathematics and start dancing with it like music, something magical begins to happen. We stop demanding that our experiences last forever. We stop being devastated when pleasant moments pass away. We stop being so desperate to escape difficult moments. Because we begin to understand that the very nature of all experience is to arise, express itself fully, and then dissolve back into the silence from which it came. like notes in a symphony, like waves in the ocean, like breath itself. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a master musician who was asked to perform for a king. The king, who understood very little about music, became frustrated during the performance. "Why do you keep changing the melody?" he demanded. "Why can't you just play the beautiful part over and over?" The musician smiled gently and explained, "Your Majesty, if I played only one note, no matter how beautiful, it would not be music. Music exists in the movement between notes, in the silence that gives meaning to sound, in the flow that connects beginning to middle to end." The king listened more carefully and began to hear what the musician meant. The beauty wasn't in any single moment, but in the way all the moments wove together into something larger than any of its parts. This is exactly how life works when we understand its musical nature. We stop trying to freeze the beautiful moments and make them permanent. We stop trying to skip over the challenging passages and get to the parts we prefer. Instead, we begin to appreciate the entire composition, the way joy gives meaning to sorrow, the way rest gives meaning to activity, the way silence gives meaning to sound. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence reveals something profound about why we suffer. We suffer not because things change, but because we resist their changing. We treat life like a mathematical equation that should give us consistent results, and then we feel betrayed when the music of existence keeps flowing into new movements. Imagine trying to hold on to a note in a symphony and refusing to let the music continue. You'd miss the entire rest of the piece. Or imagine insisting that a river stop flowing so you could keep your favorite water in place. You'd destroy the very thing that makes the river beautiful. This is what we do when we try to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. When we grasp desperately at good times, trying to make them last forever. When we resist difficult times, refusing to let them be part of our story. When we demand that people, circumstances, and our own internal states remain fixed and predictable. We're asking music to behave like mathematics, and then wondering why life feels so stressful and unsatisfying. But there's another way to live, a way that flows with the musical nature of existence rather than fighting it. The Taoists call it Wu Wei, which means non-forcing or effortless action. It's the art of moving with life's rhythm rather than against it, of dancing with change rather than wrestling with it. When you watch a skilled dancer, you notice something beautiful. They're not fighting the music or trying to impose their own rhythm on it. They're listening deeply, feeling the beat, allowing the music to move through them and express itself as movement. The result is grace, beauty, a perfect harmony between the dancer and the dance. This is how we can learn to live. not as people trying to control the music of existence, but as dancers who've learned to listen so deeply to life's rhythm that our actions become a natural expression of its flow. When we align ourselves with the musical nature of reality, we stop exhausting ourselves trying to make permanent what wants to flow, and we start participating in the endless creativity of existence itself. Let's bring this understanding into the specific details of daily life. Think about your relationships. How often do you find yourself trying to freeze beautiful moments with loved ones, trying to make them permanent, or demanding that people remain exactly as they were when you first fell in love with them? This is like asking a song to stay on one note forever. It misses the beauty of how relationships, like music, find their meaning in movement, growth, and change. Consider your career or creative projects. Do you approach them like mathematical problems that should yield predictable results if you just apply the right formula? Or can you see them as improvisational jazz pieces where the beauty emerges from your willingness to respond creatively to whatever arises? Think about your emotions and internal states. How much energy do you spend trying to maintain good moods and eliminate difficult feelings? What would it be like to treat your emotional life like a piece of music, where every feeling, joy, sadness, anger, peace, confusion, clarity, is a note that belongs in the larger composition of your human experience? There's a profound freedom that comes from embracing the musical nature of existence. When you no longer need to control the rhythm, when you stop demanding that life follow your preferred melody, you become available to participate in something much larger and more beautiful than anything you could have composed on your own. You become part of the cosmic improvisation that's been playing since the beginning of time. The ancient Zen masters understood this so deeply. They would often speak of just sitting, not trying to achieve any particular state or reach any specific goal, but simply being present to whatever was arising in this moment. They weren't treating meditation like a mathematical formula for enlightenment. They were approaching it like musicians learning to listen so deeply to the silence that sound could emerge naturally and spontaneously. This is why so many spiritual traditions use musical metaphors. The Hindu concept of Nada Brahma, the idea that the universe itself is sound, is vibration, is music. The Christian mystics, who spoke of hearing the music of the spheres, the Sufi whirling dervishes who found God in the rhythm of spinning. They all recognized that reality at its deepest level is not mechanical, but musical, not static, but dynamic, not fixed, but flowing. But here's what's particularly beautiful about understanding life as music rather than mathematics. In mathematics, there are right and wrong answers. In music, there are only different expressions, different interpretations, different ways of participating in the ongoing creation. When you make a mistake in mathematics, you've failed. When you hit a wrong note in jazz, you've just found a new place to take the improvisation. This understanding transforms how we relate to what we usually call mistakes or failures in life. They become not evidence that we're doing life wrong, but simply unexpected notes in our personal symphony that we can learn to incorporate into the larger melody. They become opportunities for creative response rather than proof of inadequacy. The Buddha's teaching on impermanence reveals that this flowing, musical quality exists at every level of existence. Your thoughts are impermanent. They arise like notes and dissolve like echoes. Your emotions are impermanent. They flow through you like melodies, each one complete in itself, each one temporary. Your physical sensations are impermanent. They pulse and rhythm through your body like the beat that gives structure to the song. Even your sense of being a separate self is impermanent. Like a melody that seems distinct, but is actually inseparable from the silence that contains it. Your individual existence is a beautiful, temporary expression of something much larger and more mysterious. You are not separate from the music of existence. You are one of its countless instruments, one of its infinite expressions. When we really understand this, when we feel it in our bones rather than just thinking about it intellectually, something profound shifts in how we move through the world. We stop being so attached to outcomes because we recognize that the beauty is in the playing, not in any particular result. We stop being so afraid of change because we see that change is not the enemy of stability. It is the very condition that makes aliveness possible. There's a story about a famous composer who was asked what his favorite piece of music was. He thought for a long moment and then said, "The one I'm writing now." When pressed to explain, he continued, "Every moment of life is like writing a piece of music that has never been written before. The notes I'm playing right now, the rhythm I'm moving to right now, the harmony I'm creating with this moment, this is always the most beautiful music because it's the only music that actually exists. This is the invitation that life offers us in every moment. To stop treating it like a math problem to be solved and start experiencing it like a song to be sung. To stop demanding that it follow our predetermined formulas and start dancing with its ever-changing rhythms. When you wake up tomorrow morning, instead of immediately calculating what needs to be accomplished or solved, try listening for the music that's already playing. The rhythm of your breath, the melody of birds outside your window, the harmony between your heartbeat and the vast pulse of existence itself. See if you can spend even 5 minutes treating the day like a piece of music you get to participate in, rather than a mathematical equation you need to figure out. Notice how different this feels. Notice how it changes your relationship to uncertainty, to change, to the unexpected moments that arise throughout the day. Notice how it affects your ability to be present, to appreciate what's actually happening, rather than constantly measuring it against what you think should be happening. The teaching of impermanence isn't meant to make us sad about the transitory nature of everything we love. It's meant to wake us up to the extraordinary preciousness of each passing moment. When we know that this conversation, this sunset, this embrace, this breath will never happen in exactly this way again, we can finally give it the attention it deserves. And when we learn to appreciate the temporary nature of difficult experiences as well, we find that we can be present with them too, without the additional suffering that comes from wanting them to be different. Pain becomes like a minor key in the symphony, not something to be avoided, but something that adds depth and poignancy to the overall composition. Challenge becomes like syncopation, a rhythmic complexity that makes the music more interesting, not a mistake that ruins the song. As we continue this journey together, we're going to explore what it means to live as conscious participants in the music of existence, rather than as frustrated mathematicians trying to solve the equation of life. We're going to discover how to dance with change rather than resist it, how to improvise with uncertainty rather than be paralyzed by it. But for now, just listen. Right now, in this moment, there's a symphony playing. Your breath is part of it. Your heartbeat is part of it. The sound of these words is part of it. The silence between thoughts is part of it. You don't have to create this music, or control it, or figure it out. You just have to recognize that you're already dancing to it, already part of its endless improvisation. Reality is music, not mathematics. Life is flow, not formula. And you are both the instrument and the musician, both the dancer and the dance, both the note and the silence that gives it meaning. This recognition alone can transform everything, turning every moment from a problem to be solved into a movement, to be danced, from an equation to be figured out into a song, to be sung with the whole of your being. There's a simple truth that can revolutionize how you move through every single day of your life. It's this: you don't smile because the world is kind. You smile, and the world often returns the gesture. This might sound like a small distinction, but it contains within it one of the most profound reversals of understanding possible. Most of us have been taught to live as if we're responding to the world, as if our inner state is determined by outer circumstances. We wait for reasons to feel good. We wait for permission to be happy. We wait for evidence that it's safe to be peaceful. We wait for the world to smile at us first. But what if the relationship works in the opposite direction? What if your inner world is the starting point, not the response? What if the quality of your inner state actually creates the quality of your outer experience, rather than simply reacting to it? The Buddha understood this so clearly that he made it the opening words of one of his most famous teachings. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. Not all that happens to us, but all that we are. Our thoughts, our inner posture, our fundamental way of relating to existence, these don't just color our experience of reality. They participate in creating it. This understanding transforms everything. It means you're not a victim of circumstances waiting for life to improve, so you can finally feel better. It means you're a creative participant in the ongoing emergence of your reality, and your inner state is your primary tool of creation. Let me paint a picture of how this works in the most ordinary moments of daily life. Imagine you're walking into a coffee shop on a busy morning. If you enter with an inner state of rush, irritation, and demand, needing your coffee quickly, frustrated by the line, impatient with the process, you create a particular kind of field around yourself. People feel it. The barista feels it. The other customers feel it. And they respond to that energy, often by becoming more hurried, more defensive, more closed themselves. But imagine entering the same coffee shop with an inner state of spaciousness and genuine appreciation. Not because you're forcing positivity or pretending everything is perfect, but because you've remembered something profound about how reality works. You've remembered that your inner state is a gift you give to the world, not a response you wait to receive from it. When you approach the counter with genuine presence, with a real smile that comes from inner fullness rather than outer need, something shifts in the entire interaction. The barista feels seen and appreciated. Other customers relax slightly. The whole environment becomes a little more warm, a little more human, a little more alive. Not because you manipulated anything, but because you offered your inner state as a contribution rather than withholding it until the world proved it deserved your kindness. This is what it means to act from fullness rather than lack. Most of us have learned to hoard our positive inner states, saving them for when external conditions justify their expression. We'll be generous when we feel abundant. We'll be loving when we feel loved. We'll be peaceful when our circumstances become peaceful. But this approach keeps us forever dependent on the outer world for our inner experience. There's an ancient story that illustrates this beautifully. A traveler came to the edge of a town and met an old man sitting by the gate. "What are the people like in this town?" the traveler asked. The old man replied, "What were the people like in the town you just left?" "Oh, they were terrible," the traveler said. "Selfish, unkind, suspicious. I couldn't wait to leave." The old man nodded sadly. "I'm afraid you'll find the people here are much the same." Later that day, another traveler approached the same old man with the same question. "What were the people like in the town you just left?" the old man asked again. "They were wonderful," the second traveler replied. "Kind, generous, welcoming. I was sad to leave such good people." The old man smiled brightly. "You'll find the people here are exactly the same." This story points to something profound about how the world mirrors back to us the quality of consciousness we bring to it. The world is neither inherently kind nor inherently cruel. It's responsive. It reflects back the energy we offer it, amplifies the frequency we broadcast, and participates in creating the reality that matches our inner state. But let's be clear about what this doesn't mean. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending that difficult circumstances don't exist. This isn't about blaming yourself when bad things happen or believing that you can control everything through the power of thought alone. This is about recognizing something much more subtle and profound. Your inner state, your fundamental way of being present, your quality of attention, your basic posture toward existence, creates a field of influence around you. And this field interacts with the world in ways that often produce experiences that match its frequency. Not always, not mechanically, not in some magical way that overrides the laws of physics, but often enough and consistently enough that learning to work with this principle can transform your daily experience in remarkable ways. The Buddha's teaching that all that we are is the result of what we have thought points to something even deeper than the idea that thoughts create reality. It points to the recognition that consciousness is not separate from what it perceives. The observer and the observed, the experiencer and the experienced, are not two separate things, but aspects of one seamless process. When you truly understand this, you realize that changing your inner state isn't just about feeling better personally. It's about participating consciously in the creation of the world you experience. It's about recognizing that your consciousness is not contained within the boundaries of your skin, but extends out into the world and participates in shaping it. Let me share how this understanding can transform specific areas of your life. In your relationships, instead of waiting for others to be more loving before you open your heart, you can choose to lead with love. Not as a strategy to get love back, but as a recognition that love is something you are, not something you need to receive. When you approach relationships from this place of inner fullness, people respond differently to you. They feel safer to be authentic. They're more likely to show you their own capacity for love. Not because you manipulated them, but because you created an environment where love can naturally flourish. In your work life, instead of waiting for external recognition before you feel confident and capable, you can choose to embody the energy of someone who has something valuable to contribute. This doesn't mean being arrogant or pretentious. It means bringing your full presence and genuine enthusiasm to whatever you're doing, regardless of whether others immediately appreciate it. When you work from this inner state of contribution rather than need, opportunities often begin to arise that match that energy. In your financial life, instead of waiting until you have more money to feel abundant, you can choose to embody the consciousness of abundance with whatever you currently have. This means treating your current resources with appreciation and care, being generous within your means, and making decisions from a place of trust rather than scarcity. When you operate from this inner state of abundance, you often find that your outer circumstances begin to reflect it. But here's what's particularly beautiful about this teaching. The gesture itself, the choice to smile, to be kind, to act from fullness, is its own reward. You don't do it to get a result. You do it because it's a more joyful way to live. You do it because it feels better to move through the world as a source of positivity rather than a drain waiting to be filled. And the fact that it often creates positive responses in others becomes a beautiful bonus, not the reason for doing it. There's a profound freedom in this understanding. When you realize that your inner state is your choice, not your sentence, you're no longer hostage to external circumstances for your well-being. You can be peaceful in challenging situations. You can be generous when you don't have much. You can be loving when others are being difficult. Not because you're suppressing your authentic feelings, but because you've discovered that your deepest, authentic state is one of fullness, not emptiness. The ancient Vedantic teaching, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, points to this same recognition. What you are seeking in the world, you already are. The love you want to receive, you are capable of being. The peace you want to find, you can embody. The abundance you want to experience, you can express from your current circumstances. This isn't metaphysical theory. It's practical wisdom about how to live with maximum aliveness and minimum suffering. But let's address the resistance that often arises when people first encounter this teaching. But what if I'm going through something really difficult? What if I'm facing genuine hardship? Are you saying I should just pretend everything is fine? Not at all. This teaching isn't about denying difficult circumstances or suppressing authentic emotions. It's about recognizing that even in the midst of challenge, you have a choice about how you relate to what's happening. You can meet difficulty with presence rather than resistance. You can face uncertainty with curiosity rather than panic. You can respond to hardship with dignity rather than bitterness. When you choose these more conscious responses, you often find that difficult situations resolve more quickly and with less additional suffering. Not because you positive thought your way out of them, but because you stopped adding the extra layer of mental and emotional struggle on top of whatever was already challenging. You worked with reality rather than fighting it. There's another aspect of this teaching that's particularly relevant in our interconnected world. Every interaction you have is an opportunity to contribute to the collective consciousness of humanity. When you choose to respond to difficulty with wisdom rather than reactivity, you're not just helping yourself. You're adding a note of sanity to the global conversation. You're demonstrating that it's possible to remain centered in chaos, kind in conflict, peaceful in uncertainty. The world desperately needs people who understand that their inner state is their gift to the collective. In a time when reactive unconsciousness spreads so quickly through social media and mass communication, choosing to embody presence, wisdom, and compassion becomes a form of service. Your smile doesn't just change your immediate environment, it ripples out into the fabric of human consciousness itself. This is why waiting for the world to improve before you feel free is like waiting for silence to begin your song. The song is what creates the silence, not the other way around. Your freedom is what creates the conditions for others to feel free, not something you wait to receive from a freer world. The Buddha taught that this principle operates at the most fundamental level of existence. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it. This doesn't mean you can think your way into any outcome you want. It means that the quality of consciousness you bring to any situation becomes part of that situation and influences how it unfolds. When you understand this deeply, you begin to take responsibility for your inner state, not as a burden, but as a creative opportunity. You realize that every moment offers you a choice. Will you contribute chaos or peace to this situation? Will you add fear or love to this interaction? Will you bring the energy of lack or fullness to this experience? These choices don't just affect you personally. They affect everyone you encounter and everything you touch. Your inner state becomes part of the atmosphere, part of the field, part of the reality that others experience when they're around you. This is both a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous gift. It means that you have more power to influence your experience of life than you might have imagined. But it also means that this power comes with the responsibility to use it consciously, to recognize that your inner state matters not just to you, but to the world. As we sit here together, in this moment, you have an opportunity to experience this principle directly. Instead of waiting for something in your external circumstances to give you permission to feel peaceful, see if you can choose peace as your contribution to this moment. Not because everything in your life is perfect, but because peace is something you can offer rather than something you need to receive. Notice how this choice feels different from trying to feel peaceful. When you choose peace as a gift you're giving to the moment, there's no strain in it, no effort to maintain it. It's simply a recognition of what's already available, what you can access anytime you remember that your inner state is your choice, not your sentence. So the next time you find yourself waiting for the world to smile at you first, remember this truth. Your smile, your inner state of appreciation, presence, and fullness is not a response to external kindness. It's a choice, a gift, a creative act that participates in shaping the very reality you experience. You don't smile because the world is kind. You smile, and the world often returns the gesture. So too with abundance, with love, with freedom, with peace. These are not prizes to be won from an external world, but treasures to be discovered within yourself and shared with a world that's waiting for someone to go first. And that someone, that person who chooses to embody what they want to see in the world, who acts from fullness rather than waiting for fullness to arrive, that someone can be you, right here, right now. Not because you're special or different, but because you've remembered something that was always true. Your inner world is the starting point, not the response. And from that starting point, everything becomes possible. There's a tendency we all have that keeps us perpetually on the sidelines of our own lives. It's the tendency to wait for silence before we begin our song, to wait for proof before we believe, to wait for evidence before we have faith, to wait for external validation before we trust our inner knowing. But here's what this waiting costs us: everything. While we're waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect conditions, the perfect proof that it's safe to step into our fullness, life continues to unfold without our full participation. We become spectators to our own existence, always preparing to live, but never quite living. To wait until you are free to feel free is like waiting for silence to begin your song. But silence doesn't create music. Music creates silence by giving it meaning. In the same way, you don't become free by waiting for freedom to arrive. You become free by acting as if you already are, and in that acting, you discover the freedom that was always available. The Buddha understood this principle so deeply that he made it the foundation of his noble eightfold path. The very first step is right view, sama ditthi in Sanskrit. Right view doesn't mean having the correct opinions or believing the right things. It means seeing clearly, without needing external proof to validate what you see. It means trusting your capacity to recognize truth directly, immediately, without waiting for the world to confirm your perceptions. Most of us have been trained in the opposite approach. We've learned to say, "Show me, and I'll believe." We've been taught that wisdom comes from gathering enough evidence, enough external validation, enough proof that it's safe to trust our experience. But this approach keeps us forever dependent on external authority for our inner knowing. The language of "show me and I'll believe" is the language of delay. It's the language of postponement. It's the language of waiting for permission from the outside world to trust what we already know on the inside. But there's another language available to us. The language of creation, which says, "I believe, and therefore I see." This isn't about blind faith or wishful thinking. This is about recognizing that belief Real belief, not just intellectual agreement, is actually a way of seeing. When you truly believe something is possible, you begin to notice opportunities and resources that were invisible to you before. When you truly believe in your own worth, you start to attract experiences that reflect that worth. When you truly believe in your capacity for peace, you begin to find peace available in places where you couldn't see it before. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a young musician who had tremendous talent, but was terrified of performing in public. She would practice for hours alone in her room, dreaming of sharing her music with others. But every time an opportunity arose, she would find reasons to postpone. "I'm not ready yet," she would say. "I need more practice. I need to be perfect before I can perform for others." Years passed, and she became increasingly frustrated. She was waiting for the feeling of being ready, waiting for confidence to arrive, waiting for some external sign that it was time to share her gift. One day, an old teacher visited her and listened to her practice. "Your music is beautiful," the teacher said. "When will you share it with the world?" "When I'm ready," the young woman replied. "When I feel confident enough." The teacher smiled gently. "My dear, confidence doesn't come from feeling ready. Confidence comes from choosing to share your gift before you feel ready. The audience doesn't need your perfection. They need your willingness to offer what you have." The young musician realized she had been waiting for silence, waiting for her fears to completely disappear before she would begin her song. But that night, she chose to perform at a small local cafe, not because she felt ready, but because she understood that readiness comes through action, not before it. The moment she began to sing, she discovered that her fears and her courage could coexist, that her uncertainty and her gift could be present simultaneously. This is the shift from "show me and I'll believe" to "I believe and therefore I see." The musician didn't wait for evidence that she was good enough. She chose to believe in her worth as an artist and then acted from that belief. And in that acting, she saw things she couldn't see while waiting. She saw that audiences respond to authenticity more than perfection, that vulnerability creates connection, that her imperfections were actually part of her unique gift. The Buddha's teaching on right view points to this same principle, operating at the deepest level of spiritual understanding. He didn't say, "Practice until you feel enlightened, and then you'll know you're enlightened." He said, "See clearly that enlightenment is your nature, and then practice from that recognition." The seeing comes first, not the proof. This is why so many people stay stuck in spiritual seeking for decades. They're waiting for some dramatic experience, some undeniable proof, some external validation that they've made it spiritually. But enlightenment isn't an experience you have, it's a recognition of what you are. And that recognition is available right now, not as the result of future practice, but as the foundation for present moment awareness. Let's bring this understanding into practical daily life. How often do you wait for evidence before you trust yourself? How often do you postpone action until you feel completely confident? How often do you delay expressing your gifts until you're absolutely certain they'll be received well? In relationships, many people wait for proof that they're loved before they fully open their hearts. But love doesn't work that way. Love is something you offer, not something you wait to receive. When you love first, when you open your heart before you have guarantees, you create the space for love to be returned. You become a source of love rather than a seeker of love. In creative endeavors, people often wait until they feel inspired before they begin creating. But inspiration usually comes through the act of creating, not before it. The painter doesn't wait for the perfect image to appear in their mind before they touch brush to canvas. They begin with a willingness to explore, to play, to discover what wants to emerge through the process of creation itself. In pursuing dreams and goals, many wait for circumstances to be perfect before they take action. But circumstances are rarely perfect, and waiting for them to align often means waiting forever. The entrepreneur doesn't wait for guaranteed success before starting their business. The writer doesn't wait for the perfect story before they begin writing. They begin with vision, with possibility, with the willingness to learn and adjust as they go. This is the difference between the language of creation and the language of delay. The language of delay says, "When this happens, then I'll do that." The language of creation says, "I'll do this, and then we'll see what happens." One keeps you waiting, the other keeps you moving. The Buddha's teaching on right view reveals that this principle operates at the most fundamental level of perception itself. What you believe to be possible shapes what you're able to see. What you believe to be true influences what experiences become available to you. Not in some magical way that overrides reality, but in very practical ways that determine where you place your attention, what opportunities you notice, and what actions you're willing to take. There's a famous experiment in psychology where people are asked to watch a video of basketball players and count how many times the players in white pass the ball. While they're focused on counting, a person in a gorilla suit walks right through the middle of the game. Most people don't see the gorilla at all, even though it's clearly visible for several seconds. Their belief about what they're supposed to be looking for determines what they're able to see. This same principle operates in every area of life. If you believe that opportunities are scarce, you'll notice scarcity everywhere and miss the abundance that's actually available. If you believe that people are fundamentally untrustworthy, you'll focus on evidence that confirms this belief and overlook the kindness and generosity that surrounds you. If you believe that you're not capable of achieving your dreams, you'll notice every obstacle and discount every possibility. But when you shift your fundamental view, when you choose to believe in possibility, in abundance, in your own capacity for growth and contribution, suddenly you begin to see things that were invisible to you before. Opportunities that were always there become apparent. Resources that were always available become accessible. Connections that were always possible become actual. This is what the Buddha meant by right view. It's not about believing the right things in some dogmatic sense. It's about seeing clearly, without the filters of limiting beliefs, without the distortions of fear and doubt. It's about recognizing that what you take to be objective reality is actually shaped by the consciousness through which you perceive it. There's another aspect of this teaching that's particularly relevant in our current culture. We live in a time that worships data, evidence, and scientific proof, all of which have tremendous value. But we've also become suspicious of intuition, inner knowing, and direct experience. We've learned to trust experts and external authorities more than our own capacity for wisdom. The Buddha's teaching on right view doesn't dismiss the value of evidence and rational thinking, but it recognizes that there are ways of knowing that transcend the purely analytical. There's a kind of understanding that comes through direct experience, through presence, through the willingness to trust what you know, even when you can't prove it to others. This is particularly important when it comes to understanding your own worth, your own capacity, your own potential. No external authority can give you definitive proof that you're valuable, that your life matters, that you have something unique to contribute. These are recognitions that arise from within, through direct experience of your own being. And they require the courage to trust your inner knowing, even when the outer world hasn't yet reflected it back to you. There's a profound story from the Zen tradition about this. A student approached a master and said, "I've been practicing meditation for years, but I still don't feel enlightened. How will I know when I've achieved awakening?" The master replied, "The one who asks that question is already awake. Who is it that's aware of not feeling enlightened? Who is it that knows there's something called enlightenment to seek? The very awareness that can observe the search is what you're searching for." The student realized he had been waiting for some special experience to prove his awakening, but the awareness that was present right now, the consciousness that could observe thoughts, feelings, and experiences, was itself what he'd been seeking. He didn't need to wait for proof. He needed to recognize what was already present. This is the essence of not waiting for silence to begin your song. The song doesn't require perfect conditions. The song creates the conditions it needs through the act of being sung. Your life doesn't need perfect circumstances to be fully lived. Your full living creates the circumstances that support even fuller living. But let's address the fear that often arises when people first encounter this teaching. What if I'm wrong? What if I believe in something and it doesn't work out? What if I act on my inner knowing and make a mistake? The Buddha's response to this would be simple. What if you're right? What if your inner knowing is actually more reliable than you've been taught to believe? What if the very act of trusting yourself creates conditions that support that trust? What if waiting for external proof keeps you from discovering the tremendous wisdom that's available through direct experience? And even if you do make mistakes, even if your inner knowing sometimes leads you in directions that don't work out as expected, isn't that still preferable to never trusting yourself at all? Isn't it better to live as an active participant in your own life rather than a passive recipient of whatever circumstances happen to arise? The person who waits for proof before believing will always be a step behind. But the one who knows that belief is the proof, that recognition comes before evidence, that seeing clearly happens before external validation, that person moves through life as a creative force rather than a reactive victim. Here's what's particularly beautiful about this understanding. When you stop waiting for permission from the external world to trust your inner knowing, you become available to a kind of guidance that's always been present but often overlooked. The intuitive hunches, the sudden inspirations, the quiet knowings that arise from deep within, these become trusted companions rather than doubtful whispers. You begin to recognize that you have access to wisdom that doesn't come from books or experts or external authorities. You have access to the same intelligence that moves the planets, grows the trees, and beats your heart. This intelligence doesn't need to prove itself to you before you trust it. It simply needs your willingness to listen, to be present, to act from the clarity that arises in stillness. The Buddha called this right view because it's the foundation for all skillful action. When you see clearly, when you trust your capacity for direct knowing, you can respond to life from wisdom rather than fear, from presence rather than reactivity, from inner authority rather than external dependency. This doesn't mean you become reckless or ignore practical considerations. It means you balance external information with internal wisdom, practical planning with intuitive guidance, careful thinking with direct knowing. You become someone who can navigate the world skillfully while remaining connected to the deeper intelligence that's always available within. As we continue this journey together, we're going to explore what it means to live from this kind of inner authority, to make decisions from presence rather than fear, to act from vision rather than circumstance, to sing your song before the silence comes. But for now, just notice where in your life you might be waiting for proof before you believe. Where are you postponing action until you feel completely ready? Where are you waiting for external validation before you trust your inner knowing? And then consider this possibility. What if you already have everything you need to take the next step? What if your inner knowing is actually more reliable than you've been taught to believe? What if the very act of trusting yourself creates the evidence you've been waiting for? You don't need silence to begin your song. You need the courage to sing into whatever noise surrounds you, trusting that your voice will find its way, that your song will create its own space, that your willingness to begin is all the permission you need. The Buddha understood this 2,500 years ago, and his insight remains as relevant now as it was then. Right view isn't about seeing the right things. It's about seeing clearly, without waiting for the world to give you permission to trust what you see. It's about believing not because you have proof, but because belief itself is a way of seeing, a way of knowing, a way of participating in the creation of reality rather than simply reacting to it. So sing your song not because the silence has arrived, but because the song itself creates the silence it needs. Act from your knowing, not because you have guarantees, but because action from inner wisdom creates its own validation. Live from your truth, not because the world has confirmed it, but because living truthfully is the only way truth can be confirmed. This is the courage the Buddha was pointing to with right view. The courage to see clearly and act from that seeing, regardless of external proof. The courage to believe and therefore see, rather than waiting to see before you believe. The courage to sing your song into whatever silence or noise surrounds you, trusting that the act of singing is its own justification, its own proof, its own perfect and complete expression of what it means to be fully alive. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the most profound shift possible occurs. It's not a dramatic experience or a mystical revelation, though it can feel like both. It's the moment when you realize you are no longer climbing the mountain. You are realizing you are the mountain. This shift changes everything, yet on the surface, nothing changes at all. There's a beautiful Zen teaching that captures this perfectly. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities remain the same, but the one who performs them has undergone a fundamental transformation in understanding. For most of our lives, we operate from the assumption that we are separate individuals climbing towards some distant goal. We see ourselves as limited beings trying to reach unlimited states, as incomplete souls seeking completion, as lost travelers trying to find our way home. This perspective creates the entire drama of seeking, striving, and struggling that characterizes so much of human experience. But what if this fundamental assumption is mistaken? What if you are not a climber on the mountain of existence, but the mountain itself, temporarily forgetting its own vastness? What if the goal you've been seeking is not separate from the seeker, but is the very nature of the one who seeks? This recognition doesn't come through more effort. more practice, or more knowledge. It comes through a simple shift in perspective, like suddenly recognizing that what you thought was a rope in the dim light was actually a snake, or what you thought was a snake was actually a rope. The facts on the ground don't change, but your entire relationship to them transforms completely. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was once a wave that spent its entire existence trying to reach the ocean. It would rise as high as it could, stretch as far as possible, always believing that somewhere ahead lay the vast ocean it longed to join. The wave would look at other waves and feel envious of those that seemed closer to their oceanic destination. It would crash against shores with tremendous effort, always hoping that this time, this crash would finally deliver it to the ocean of its dreams. One day, exhausted from all its seeking, the wave became very still. In that stillness, something dawned on it with perfect clarity. It had never been separate from the ocean for even one moment. Every drop of its being was already ocean. Every movement it had ever made was the ocean moving. Every moment of seeking the ocean had been the ocean seeking itself. The wave realized it wasn't trying to reach the ocean. It was the ocean temporarily taking the form of a wave. This is the shift from climbing to being, from seeking the mountain to recognizing that you are the mountain. From trying to reach enlightenment to understanding that enlightenment is your very nature, temporarily appearing to itself as someone seeking enlightenment. The Buddha pointed to this recognition when he taught about Buddha nature, the understanding that what you are seeking, you already are. Not as a potential to be developed, but as a present reality to be recognized. The mountain doesn't need to climb itself to reach its peak. It simply needs to recognize that it is already the peak, the slope, the base, and the entire geological foundation. But let's bring this understanding down from the realm of metaphor into the practical reality of daily life. What does it mean to live from the recognition that you are the mountain rather than the climber? First, it means understanding that reality is not a linear path, but a field of infinite possibilities. When you think of yourself as a climber, you imagine that there's only one route to the top, one correct way to reach your goals, one proper sequence of steps to achieve fulfillment. But when you recognize yourself as the mountain, you see that every possible path exists simultaneously. Every version of yourself, the confident one, the peaceful one, the creative one, the loving one, already exists within the vast field of your being. This shift eliminates the anxiety of linear time. You no longer worry about being behind schedule or missing opportunities, because you understand that in the timeless dimension of your being, every possibility is eternally present. The version of yourself that has everything you desire isn't somewhere in the future waiting to be reached. It exists right now in the infinite field of potential that you are. Let me illustrate this with something you can experience directly. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a part of you that feels peaceful. You don't have to create this peace or work toward it or earn it. You simply have to recognize that it's already present, already accessible, already part of your nature. Peace isn't something you climb toward. It's something you are, temporarily appearing to yourself as someone seeking peace. The same is true for every quality you've ever desired. Confidence, love, creativity, wisdom, abundance, these aren't distant peaks to be climbed. They're already present in the vast field of your being, waiting not to be achieved, but to be recognized and expressed. This understanding completely transforms how you approach goals and dreams. Instead of asking, "How can I become confident?" you ask, "How can I express the confidence that's already here?" Instead of seeking love from others, you explore, "How can I share the love that I am?" Instead of trying to find your purpose, you investigate, "How can I express the unique essence that's already complete within me?" The Zen teaching about chopping wood and carrying water points to something profound about this shift. When you recognize that you are the mountain rather than the climber, you don't suddenly transcend ordinary life. You don't float above daily responsibilities or become too spiritual for practical concerns. You still chop wood and carry water. You still go to work, pay bills, have conversations, face challenges. But the quality of presence you bring to these activities transforms completely. Before the recognition, you chop wood to get warm, carry water to quench thirst. After the recognition, you chop wood as an expression of the completeness you are, carry water as a celebration of the fullness that moves through you. The actions remain the same, but they become expressions of being rather than attempts to become. This shift affects every relationship in your life. When you operate from the climber mentality, you approach relationships with need. You look for others to validate your worth, to fill your emptiness, to help you reach the emotional peaks you believe you lack. But when you recognize yourself as the mountain, you approach relationships from fullness. You no longer need others to complete you, because you understand that completeness is your nature. Instead, you can appreciate others for who they are, rather than what they can give you. Your work life transforms as well. Instead of climbing the career ladder to prove your worth, you express your worth through whatever work you do. Instead of seeking success to fill an inner void, you bring your fullness to whatever you create. Success becomes not something you chase, but something you embody. Not a destination you reach, but a quality of presence you bring to the journey itself. There's a beautiful story from the Tibetan tradition that illustrates this understanding. A student spent years meditating in a cave, seeking enlightenment through intense spiritual practice. One day, a simple village woman passed by his cave carrying water from the river. She noticed him, sitting in meditation, and asked what he was doing. "I'm seeking enlightenment," he replied with great seriousness. "I've been practicing for years to achieve the highest spiritual realization." The woman set down her water jug and laughed gently. "My dear friend, what you're seeking is looking for you through your own eyes. What you're trying to achieve is trying to achieve you through your own efforts. The mountain you're climbing to reach is the mountain you're sitting on right now." In that moment, the student realized that his years of seeking had been the enlightenment seeking itself. His meditation practice hadn't been a method to reach some distant goal. It had been enlightenment expressing itself as spiritual practice. He wasn't a separate being trying to reach unity. He was unity, temporarily appearing to itself as someone seeking unity. This recognition is available to everyone in every moment. You don't need years of meditation or special spiritual experiences. You simply need to recognize what's already here, what's already true, what's already complete about your existence. The field of infinite possibilities that you are contains every version of yourself simultaneously. The wise you, the foolish you, the confident you, the uncertain you, the loving you, the fearful you. All of these exist right now in the timeless dimension of your being. They're not different people you might become in the future. They're different expressions of the one consciousness you are, available to be embodied in any moment you choose to recognize them. This understanding eliminates the concept of wasted time. Every moment you've spent seeking, every effort you've made to improve yourself, every struggle you've endured, all of it has been the mountain exploring its own vastness. There have been no mistakes, no detours, no wrong turns. There has only been consciousness appearing to itself in countless forms, each one perfect in its own expression. Even your current challenges and limitations are part of this perfection. The mountain doesn't reject its rocky outcroppings or wish away its steep faces. These apparent obstacles are part of what makes the mountain magnificent, part of what gives it character and depth. In the same way, your struggles and imperfections aren't things to be transcended. They're part of the unique landscape of your being. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop growing. Mountains are constantly changing, weathering, shifting, evolving. But this change comes from their natural expression, not from a sense that they're inadequate, as they are. When you recognize yourself as the mountain, your growth becomes natural expression rather than desperate seeking. You might still set goals, pursue dreams, and work toward various achievements. But these activities arise from the joy of expression rather than the pain of incompletion. You create not because you're lacking something, but because creation is the natural overflow of the fullness you are. You love not because you need to be loved, but because love is the fundamental nature of what you are. The Zen masters understood this so deeply. They would often give their students impossible tasks, like the famous koan of, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" These weren't meant to be solved intellectually, but to exhaust the mind's attempts to climb toward understanding. When the seeking mind finally collapsed from its own efforts, what remained was the recognition that had always been present. The one who was seeking was what was being sought. This is why enlightenment is often described as both the most extraordinary and the most ordinary thing possible. Extraordinary because it completely revolutionizes your understanding of who and what you are. Ordinary because it changes nothing about your actual nature. It simply recognizes what was always true. You are already the peak you've been trying to reach. You are already the peace you've been seeking. You are already the love you've been hoping to find. You are already the wisdom you've been trying to acquire. Not as concepts to believe in, but as the living reality of what you most fundamentally are. This recognition doesn't require special circumstances or perfect conditions. It's available right now, in whatever situation you find yourself, regardless of how far you feel from any spiritual or personal ideal. The mountain doesn't wait for perfect weather to be a mountain. It is what it is under all conditions, in all seasons, through all changes. As we near the completion of our journey together, we're going to explore what it means to live from this recognition, to chop wood and carry water as the mountain rather than the climber. We're going to discover how ordinary life becomes extraordinary when lived from the understanding that you are not separate from what you seek. But for now, just rest in this possibility. What if you are not a limited being trying to reach unlimited states? What if you are unlimited consciousness, temporarily appearing to itself as someone with apparent limitations? What if the journey you've been on has been consciousness exploring its own infinite nature through the beautiful disguise of being you? You are no longer climbing the mountain. You are realizing you are the mountain. And from this peak that you have always been, every direction leads home, every step is perfect, and every moment is the arrival you've been seeking throughout this entire magnificent, mysterious, completely ordinary, and utterly extraordinary experience of being human. The wood still needs to be chopped. The water still needs to be carried. But now you know who is doing the chopping and carrying. Not a separate someone seeking completion, but completeness itself, joyfully expressing its nature through the simple, sacred activities of daily life. This is the recognition that transforms everything while changing nothing. This is the shift from seeking the mountain to being the mountain. This is coming home to what you have never, for even one moment, actually left. There's something about water that teaches us one of life's most essential lessons if we're willing to pay attention. Try to grasp water in your hands, and you'll discover something both frustrating and profound. The harder you squeeze, the more it escapes. The tighter your grip, the faster it slips through your fingers. But cup your hands gently, and water will rest there peacefully, available for whatever purpose you need. This simple truth about water reveals something fundamental about how life itself works. The more you try to force outcomes, the more they seem to elude you. The more desperately you chase happiness, the more it retreats. The more urgently you demand that people love you, the more they pull away. The more you insist that circumstances align with your desires, the more chaotic everything becomes. But when you learn to hold life lightly, when you can want something without grasping it, pursue dreams without demanding them, love people without possessing them, something magical begins to happen. Life starts to flow toward you instead of away from you. Opportunities arise naturally. Relationships deepen organically. Solutions appear in ways you could never have orchestrated through force. The Buddha understood this principle so deeply that he made it the heart of his third noble truth. He taught that freedom from suffering comes not through getting what we want, but through releasing our attachment to needing things to be different than they are. This teaching, called Nirodha in Sanskrit, points to a radical shift in how we relate to desire, to outcomes, and to life itself. But let's be clear about what this doesn't mean. Surrender doesn't mean becoming passive, giving up on your dreams, or accepting harmful situations without response. True surrender is not resignation or defeat. It's something far more intelligent and powerful. It's the art of aligning yourself with life's deeper rhythm instead of fighting against it. Think of a skilled dancer. They don't force the music to conform to their movements. Instead, they listen so deeply to the rhythm that their movements become a natural expression of what they hear. They surrender to the music, and in that surrender, they find a freedom of expression that would be impossible through forcing. This is the kind of surrender that leads not to powerlessness, but to a different kind of power entirely. There's an ancient Taoist story that illustrates this beautifully. A master swordsman was challenged by a younger, stronger opponent who was known for his aggressive fighting style. When the match began, the young warrior attacked with tremendous force, swinging his sword with all his might. But the master seemed to barely move. He would step aside at the last possible moment, allowing his opponent's force to carry him past. He would yield just enough to let the attack flow by harmlessly, then gently redirect that energy back toward his opponent. The harder the young man fought, the more exhausted he became. The more force he used, the more that force was turned against him. Finally, completely depleted, he collapsed. The master had won without striking a single aggressive blow, simply by understanding how to work with force rather than against it. This is the essence of what the Buddha taught about non-attachment. It's not about becoming indifferent to outcomes or caring about nothing. It's about learning to engage with life fully while holding your preferences lightly. It's about pursuing your goals with enthusiasm while remaining unattached to any specific result. It's about loving people deeply while allowing them the freedom to be exactly who they are. Let me share how this principle plays out in the most practical areas of daily life. Consider your relationships. When you grasp desperately at someone's affection, when you try to control their responses, manipulate their feelings, or demand their attention, you create exactly the kind of pressure that drives people away. It's like squeezing water. The harder you grip, the more quickly it escapes. But when you can love someone without needing to possess them, when you can appreciate them without demanding that they fulfill your expectations, when you can be present with them without agenda, that's when real intimacy becomes possible. People feel safe to be authentic around you because they sense that your love for them isn't conditional on their performance. They feel free to come closer because they know you won't grasp them once they do. The same principle applies to your career and creative endeavors. When you approach your work with desperate attachment to specific outcomes, when you need every project to succeed, every effort to be recognized, every creative expression to be praised, you create a kind of energetic tension that often sabotages the very results you're seeking. But when you can give your best effort while remaining unattached to how it's received, when you can pour your heart into your work while releasing control over its reception, when you can create from joy rather than need, that's when your authentic power can flow freely. Paradoxically, this non-attachment often leads to better results than grasping ever could. There's a story about a famous artist who was commissioned to paint a portrait of a wealthy merchant. The merchant was very specific about how he wanted to be portrayed, more handsome than he actually was, with certain unflattering features minimized. The artist tried desperately to please him, adjusting and readjusting the painting to meet every demand. But the more he tried to force the portrait to match the merchant's expectations, the more lifeless and artificial it became. Finally, in frustration, the artist abandoned all attempts to please and simply painted what he saw, the merchant as he truly was, with all his imperfections, but also with the dignity and character that those imperfections revealed. When the merchant saw this final version, he was moved to tears. "This is the first time anyone has truly seen me," he said. The artist had discovered that truth emerges, not through forcing, but through surrender to what is actually present. The Buddha's teaching on non-attachment reveals something profound about the nature of suffering itself. Most of our pain doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from our resistance to what happens to us. It comes from our insistence that reality should be different than it is. It comes from our attachment to outcomes that may or may not occur. When you can learn to want without grasping, to prefer without demanding, to hope without attachment, you discover a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. This peace doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from releasing the insistence that you must have what you want in order to be okay. But let's explore what this looks like in the midst of real challenge and difficulty. Surrender doesn't mean passively accepting harmful situations or failing to take appropriate action when action is needed. True surrender often requires tremendous courage and clarity. Imagine you're facing a serious health challenge. Surrender doesn't mean refusing medical treatment or pretending the illness doesn't exist. It means doing everything you can to support your healing while simultaneously releasing your attachment to any specific outcome. It means fighting for your life without being at war with your circumstances. It means hoping for recovery while making peace with uncertainty. This kind of surrender requires a profound trust, not a blind faith that everything will work out as you want it to, but a deeper trust in the intelligence of life itself. It's trusting that whatever arises, you have the capacity to meet it with presence and wisdom. It's trusting that even if things don't go according to your plan, there's a larger pattern at work that you may not be able to see from your current perspective. There's a beautiful Zen story about a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors came to express their sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. The farmer simply replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The next day, his horse returned, bringing with it a herd of wild horses. The neighbors came to congratulate him on his good fortune. "What wonderful luck," they exclaimed. Again, the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The following day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses and broke his leg. The neighbors returned to offer condolences. "What terrible luck," they said again. "Maybe so, maybe not," the farmer responded. "We'll see." The next week, military officers came to draft young men for war, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. Once again, the neighbors gathered, this time celebrating the good fortune. And once again, the farmer simply said, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." This story illustrates the profound wisdom of non-attachment. The farmer wasn't indifferent to what happened. He surely had preferences about his horse, his son's health, and the threat of war. But he had learned to hold all outcomes lightly, understanding that his limited perspective couldn't possibly grasp the full picture of how events would unfold over time. This kind of surrender requires a fundamental shift in how we understand control. Most of us have been taught to believe that we're responsible for making things happen, for forcing outcomes, for controlling circumstances through will and effort. But life reveals again and again that our actual control is much more limited than we imagine. What we can control is our response to what arises. We can control the quality of presence we bring to each moment. We can control whether we meet life with resistance or acceptance, with fear or love, with grasping or openness. And paradoxically, when we focus our energy on what we actually can control rather than what we cannot, we often find that life begins to flow more smoothly. The Buddha's third noble truth points to something even deeper than releasing attachment to outcomes. It points to the recognition that the one who is attached, the ego that grasps and demands and insists, is itself a kind of illusion. When you investigate deeply into who or what is doing the grasping, you often find that there's no solid, separate entity there at all. There's only awareness, only consciousness, only the open space in which experiences arise and pass away. And this awareness has never been attached to anything, has never grasped anything, has never needed anything to be different than it is. It simply observes, simply receives, simply allows everything to be exactly as it is in each moment. When you rest in this awareness, when you identify with the space of consciousness rather than the contents that arise within it, you discover a kind of peace that is completely unshakable. This peace doesn't depend on circumstances being pleasant. It doesn't require problems to be solved or desires to be fulfilled. It exists as the very nature of awareness itself, available in any moment you remember to rest there. But again, this doesn't make you passive or indifferent. From this place of non-attachment, action becomes more skillful, not less. You can respond to situations with clarity rather than reactivity. You can make decisions from wisdom rather than fear. You can engage with challenges from a place of centered presence rather than desperate grasping. There's a profound difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up contains an energy of defeat, of resignation, of collapsed hope. But letting go contains an energy of freedom, of trust, of intelligent release. When you let go, you're not abandoning your dreams or desires, you're holding them more skillfully. Think of it like learning to hold a bird. If you grasp too tightly, you'll crush it. If you hold too loosely, it will fly away. But if you can find that perfect balance, holding gently enough to provide safety but lightly enough to allow freedom, the bird may choose to stay simply because it feels safe and appreciated. This is how surrender works with your dreams and goals. You hold them gently, provide them with your attention and energy, but you don't grip them so tightly that you suffocate their natural unfolding. You create conditions that support their manifestation while remaining unattached to whether they manifest in exactly the way you envision. The ancient Taoists called this Wu Wei, effortless action, or action that flows in harmony with the natural way of things. It's like the way water flows around obstacles rather than trying to force its way through them. Water always finds the path of least resistance, yet over time, it can carve through the hardest stone. This is the power of surrender, not the power of force, but the power of intelligent yielding. When you align yourself with this deeper rhythm of life, you begin to sense when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to step back, when to speak and when to remain silent. You develop what the Buddha called right action, action that arises from wisdom rather than compulsion, from clarity rather than confusion, from love rather than fear. This alignment often requires a period of learning to trust. For those of us who have spent years trying to control outcomes through force and effort, surrender can initially feel terrifying. If I don't make things happen, nothing will happen, the mind protests. If I don't control the outcome, everything will fall apart. But as you begin to experiment with surrender, starting with small, low-stakes situations, you often discover something surprising. Life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own way of bringing things together in ways you could never have orchestrated. Opportunities arise that you couldn't have created through effort. Solutions appear that you couldn't have thought your way to. Connections form that you couldn't have forced into being. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means your actions begin to flow from inspiration rather than desperation, from intuitive guidance rather than mental calculation, from presence rather than anxiety about the future. There's a story about a master gardener who was asked the secret of his success. "I don't force the plants to grow," he said. "I simply create the conditions that support their natural growth, and then I get out of the way. I water them when they need water, provide sunlight when they need light, protect them from harsh weather when necessary. But I don't try to make them grow faster than their natural rhythm, and I don't try to change their essential nature. I work with their inherent intelligence rather than against it." This is the art of surrender in daily life. You create conditions that support what you want to flourish. You plant seeds through your actions, water them with your attention, provide them with the light of your positive intention. But then you trust the process, trust the timing, trust that life has its own intelligence about how things grow and develop. The Buddha's teaching about non-attachment doesn't ask you to stop caring about outcomes. It asks you to care about outcomes while simultaneously caring about something even deeper, the quality of presence and love you bring to whatever is happening right now. When you can care fully while grasping lightly, when you can hope deeply while accepting completely, you discover a way of living that is both fully engaged and completely peaceful. As we near the end of our journey together, I want you to consider where in your life you might be grasping water. Where are you trying to force outcomes that might flow more naturally if you could relax your grip? Where are you squeezing so tightly that what you want most is slipping through your fingers? And then, with great gentleness, see if you can experiment with cupping your hands instead of clenching them. See if you can hold your desires lightly, pursue your dreams with effort but without attachment, love people deeply while allowing them complete freedom to be themselves. This is not a practice of giving up or giving in. This is a practice of giving over to the deeper intelligence that moves through all of life, that knows how to grow flowers and heal wounds and bring hearts together across impossible distances. This is the art of receiving through surrender, of finding power through yielding, of discovering that the water you thought was escaping was actually always available, always present, always ready to support whatever purpose your open hands might serve. The Buddha's third noble truth promises that this kind of surrender leads to freedom. Not freedom from having preferences or desires, but freedom from the suffering that comes from insisting that reality conform to those preferences. It's the freedom to want without grasping, to hope without attachment, to love without possession. It's the peace that comes not from getting what you want, but from discovering that what you most deeply want, peace itself, was never dependent on external circumstances at all. Water teaches us this every day if we're willing to learn. Hold it gently, and it stays. Try to grasp it, and it flows away. But remember, it never really leaves. It simply finds another form, another path, another way to serve the endless circulation of life itself. And in that circulation, in that flow, in that constant movement between holding and releasing, we find the rhythm that leads us home to the peace we've been seeking all along. As our journey together draws to a close, I want to share with you one final image that brings everything we've explored into perfect focus. Imagine that you have a radio, and somewhere out there, in the vastness of space, your favorite station is broadcasting. The music is already playing. The signal is already transmitting. The frequency is already there, complete and whole, waiting for you to discover it. You don't need to create the station. You don't need to compose the music or generate the signal. You simply need to tune your radio to the right frequency, and suddenly, what was always there becomes available to your experience. This is exactly how the peace, joy, and completeness you've been seeking actually work. They're not distant achievements waiting to be earned through struggle and effort. They're frequencies that are already broadcasting, already available, already here. You just need to remember how to tune in. Throughout these hours together, we've been exploring all the ways we accidentally tune away from our true frequency. We learned how the fog of incompletion convinces us that something is missing. We saw how the moving finish line keeps us perpetually seeking. We discovered how we become waves desperately trying to become water, forgetting that we already are water. we explored how reality is more like music than mathematics, and how our inner state creates our outer experience. We recognized the futility of waiting for silence before we begin our song, and discovered that we are the mountain we've been trying to climb. We learned that grasping water only makes it slip away, while gentle cupping allows it to rest peacefully in our hands. The Buddha understood this so clearly when he taught, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." He wasn't offering this as advice or philosophy. He was pointing to a simple, practical truth. Peace isn't something you find in external circumstances or achievements. It's something you tune into, something you recognize, something you remember is always available, regardless of what's happening around you. The frequency of peace is broadcasting right now. The frequency of love is available in this very moment. The frequency of completeness, of wisdom, of joy, they're all here, all transmitting, all waiting for you to adjust your inner dial and remember how to receive them. This doesn't mean you ignore the practical realities of life or pretend that challenges don't exist. It means you meet those realities from the frequency of peace rather than the frequency of panic. You respond to challenges from the frequency of wisdom rather than the frequency of reactivity. You approach relationships from the frequency of love rather than the frequency of need. And here's what's beautiful about this understanding. The more you tune into these frequencies, the more natural it becomes. Like learning to ride a bicycle, what once required conscious effort becomes effortless presence. You don't have to constantly remind yourself to be peaceful. You simply remember that peace is your natural frequency, and you gently return to it whenever you notice you've drifted away. The radio analogy reveals something profound about spiritual growth. You're not building something from scratch or creating new capacities. You're simply remembering how to tune into what's always been available, how to access what's always been yours. This is why children often seem naturally peaceful before life teaches them to tune into different frequencies. This is why moments of natural beauty can instantly reconnect us to wonder. This is why deep rest can reveal a peace that feels both surprising and completely familiar. We're not creating these experiences. We're tuning into frequencies that never stopped broadcasting. As you continue your journey beyond our time together, remember that you carry this radio with you always. In moments of stress, you can pause and ask yourself, what frequency am I tuned into right now? In times of conflict, you can choose to tune into the frequency of understanding rather than being right. In periods of uncertainty, you can attune to the frequency of trust rather than fear. The tuning process is always gentle. You don't force the dial or wrench it violently from one station to another. You turn it slowly, carefully, listening for the signal to become clearer, for the static to fade away. And suddenly the music emerges, not because you created it, but because you found the frequency where it was always playing. Before we part ways, I want to acknowledge something beautiful that's happened during our time together. Right now, people from all over the world have been listening to these words, tuning into the same frequency of possibility and peace. Whether you're in your bedroom at midnight, walking through a park, or sitting in your car during a break, you've been part of a global community, remembering their way home to themselves. Every time you choose peace over panic, love over fear, presence over distraction, you're contributing to a collective tuning that makes it easier for others to find these frequencies too. Your commitment to remembering who you truly are isn't just personal. It's a gift to everyone whose life you touch. So as we close, I want to express my deep gratitude. Gratitude for your willingness to take this journey, for your openness to exploring these ideas, for your courage to consider that you might already be everything you've been seeking. The station is always broadcasting. Your true frequency, the frequency of peace, love, wisdom, and completeness, never goes off the air. Sometimes, you'll find yourself tuned into other stations, caught up in the static of worry, or the noise of seeking. That's completely natural, completely human, completely okay. When you notice you've drifted, simply reach for the dial with gentleness and compassion. Turn slowly toward the frequency that feels most like home. Listen for the signal that reminds you of who you truly are beneath all the stories, all the seeking, all the apparent complexity of human life. The Buddha's words echo across 2,500 years. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This means that no matter what's happening in your external world, you always have access to the frequency of peace, love, and wisdom. Not as something you need to earn, but as something you can tune into anytime you remember that the radio is in your hands. So rest now, if rest feels right. Carry these frequencies with you into your day, into your relationships, into whatever challenges and joys await you. Remember that you are both the radio and the music, both the receiver and the signal, both the seeker and what you've been seeking all along. Thank you for this sacred time together. Thank you for your beautiful willingness to remember. The frequency of your true nature is always on. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to the peace that was never actually absent. The song continues, and you are both its listener and its voice, forever tuned to the frequency of wholeness.